He told me, "You're not worthy of being my wife." I didn't cry. I just looked at him and smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally saw who he really was. That night, I packed my bags and walked out into the Vermont winter. Snow covered the roads, the air was sharp against my skin, and the silence around me felt heavier than any argument could, because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of freedom and the beginning of revenge. I met Nathan Hale on a late March afternoon when winter hadn't fully left Burlington. The snow was melting, but the air still smelled like cold metal and coffee. I was at a cafe, sketching ideas for an interior design project, when he walked in, clean-cut, polite, and confident in that quiet, calculated way. He asked if he could share my table. There were empty seats all around, but I said yes. Maybe I was lonely, or maybe I just liked the way he looked at people, directly, as if every word mattered. Nathan was a financial advisor. I was a freelance interior designer. He talked about balance and stability as if they were art forms, and I talked about light and texture like they were emotions. Somehow our opposites fit. At least, that's what I told myself. In the beginning, he was attentive in a way that felt rare. He'd noticed the way I stirred my tea counterclockwise, the colors I wore, how I always double-checked door locks before bed. "You're thoughtful," he'd say. I like that. When he gave me a small leather notebook for my birthday, he said, "A creative woman like you should always have something beautiful to write in." I thought it was romantic. I didn't realize he was already studying me, learning what I'd trade in exchange for approval. A few months later, we moved in together. That's when things started to shift. Nathan insisted on fairness. "Everything should be 50-50, he said. Bills, chores, meals. At first, it sounded reasonable, but soon, fairness became a way to measure loyalty. If I stayed late working on a project, he'd say, "A good partner knows how to balance her priorities." If I forgot to text him back while meeting a client, he'd reply hours later with, "I just needed some space. You seem busy." Every time I defended myself, he'd go quiet, completely. The kind of silence that stretches across a room and makes you question your sanity. Then days later, he'd act normal again, and I'd apologize without knowing what for. His quiet wasn't peace. It was punishment. Still, I told myself he was just stressed from work. That's what love does. It gives people excuses. He slowly started reshaping my world. I stopped wearing the colors he said were too loud. I quit seeing friends he called immature. I changed my tone, my habits, my laughter. I told myself it was growth, but it was really disappearance. He'd make little comments in front of others, soft, cutting ones disguised as jokes. "Claire's creative," he'd tell his friends. "She can make a room look like no one lives there." Everyone laughed. I did too. But that night, while brushing my teeth, I stared at my reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. When he proposed, it was during a quiet dinner at home. No big gesture, no flowers. Just him, kneeling by the couch with a small silver ring, saying, "I chose you because I know you can become the perfect wife." The words should have warmed me. Instead, they made my chest tighten. But I said yes anyway. After that, his control sharpened. He started correcting my choices. "This lipstick's too bright. Your friends are a distraction. Don't post too much on social media. It looks desperate." When I asked if my best friend Lena could be my maid of honor, he frowned. "She's divorced. That kind of energy doesn't belong at a wedding." I nodded, silent. It was easier that way, but deep down, I started keeping score of every time he made me smaller. And then one night, I came home early from a meeting. He didn't hear me come in. He was on the phone, pacing in the living room, saying, "She's great, but not quite there yet. I just need someone I can be proud of, someone who doesn't make me feel like I'm dragging her." I froze in the hallway. The words hit harder than any argument could. I didn't say anything. I just quietly backed away, took a long shower, and pretended I hadn't heard a thing. That night, I cooked dinner, poured him wine, and smiled when he sat down. He didn't notice that something in me had died, something quiet but permanent. A week before the wedding, the tension between us was thick, like the air before a thunderstorm. Nathan was obsessed with planning every single detail. The invitations, the menu, the seating chart. He called it making sure our big day is perfect. I called it control in disguise. We had a pre-wedding dinner with his coworkers and friends, people who admired Nathan, people who saw him as the one who has it all together. I was just his fiancé. Smiling on cue, he picked out my dress for the evening. Cream-colored. Modest, elegant, but not attention-seeking, as he put it. When we arrived, the restaurant was dim and polished, filled with polite laughter and expensive perfume. At the table, someone asked if I worked in finance too. I said no, that I was a designer. One woman laughed and said to Nathan, "So you'll be the breadwinner, huh?" The table chuckled. Nathan smirked. He didn't correct her. He just said, "Claire has a great eye for detail, but sometimes she forgets that not every detail makes money." Laughter again. My hands went cold under the table. Nathan reached over and squeezed my shoulder as if to comfort me, his hand firm, possessive. That touch, the one everyone else saw as affection, felt like ownership. On the drive home, he said, "You're so sensitive." I was just joking. Everyone had a good time, right? I didn't answer. He went on. "You should learn not to take everything so personally. A wife needs to know her place in public." That phrase stuck in my head, her place. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, realizing I had become a guest in my own life. 2 days later, we went to the bridal boutique for my final dress fitting. I had picked a simple V-neck dress, elegant and light, the kind of dress that felt like me. Nathan crossed his arms and frowned. "She looks fine," he said to the stylist, "but not enough. Don't you have something that makes her look like a real wife?" Everyone went silent. The stylist glanced at me, unsure what to say. That's when it happened. The quietest, cleanest break I've ever experienced. I slipped off the engagement ring, placed it gently on the counter, and said, "Then maybe you should find someone who makes you feel worthy." Nathan's face shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Are you serious right now? Do you have any idea what you're doing?" "Not everyone gets to marry me." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You're right. Not everyone can survive it," and I walked out. When I got home, he was already there, pacing like a storm in a suit. "You're throwing away everything," he said, voice rising. "Do you know how many people I've told about this wedding? Do you know how hard I've worked to make people respect you?" I stood still, my hands steady. "I never asked you to." He threw the guest list onto the floor, papers scattering like broken glass. "This wedding won't happen unless you fix your attitude," he said. "Then it won't happen," I answered. He froze, stunned, silent, maybe realizing for the first time that his control meant nothing without my participation. Finally, he muttered, "You'll regret this, Claire." "Maybe," I said, grabbing my coat. "But at least this time the mistake will be mine." I closed the door behind me. The air outside was cold, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel suffocating. I walked down the quiet Vermont street, my breath visible in the winter air, and realized something simple and terrifying. Nathan had built his power on my silence, and now that I'd taken it back, he had nothing left to say. The morning after, I packed my suitcase, a few clothes, some savings, and that leather notebook Nathan once gave me, not because it meant something, but because I needed a reminder of how easily I used to confuse manipulation with love. The cold hit me hard when I stepped outside. Burlington winters are cruel, but at least the cold was honest, unlike the warmth I'd been living in. I rented a tiny apartment near Lake Champlain. The place had creaky floors and a radiator that hissed every night, but it was mine. No expectations, no corrections, no silent treatments. For the first few days, I slept like someone who hadn't in years. My body was catching up on rest, and my mind was learning what peace sounded like. By the end of the week, I opened my laptop, went through old client emails, and reached out to everyone I'd once ignored. Within a few days, I got a new design project, a small cabin renovation. The pay wasn't much, but the sense of control, that was priceless. On day 8, Nathan texted, "We need to talk." "Don't make this childish." I didn't reply. The next day, he emailed me. "I canceled the wedding. If you're willing to act like an adult, we can still make this work. I'm ready to forgive you. Forgive me." The words made me laugh, the kind of small, bitter laugh you let out when you finally see the joke that's been on you all along. I didn't delete his messages. I kept them there, untouched, like trophies of every moment I didn't give him what he wanted. A reaction. Weeks passed. My silence became its own rhythm, the quiet routine of work, coffee, and solitude. Every morning, I'd wake up to an untouched text from him. And every morning, I'd smile and leave it unread. Lena came by one afternoon carrying takeout and wine. We hadn't seen each other in months. When she stepped into my little apartment, she looked around and said, "You know, I've never seen you this calm before." I smiled. Silence isn't empty, Lena. It's full of answers. Nathan didn't take the hint. His messages started shifting from guilt to anger. "You're making me look like a fool. Everyone's asking what happened. You're ruining my reputation. You think people will side with you? They won't. I didn't respond to any of it." Let him wrestle with the echo. Then one afternoon, I saw him at the grocery store. I was walking past the produce section when I heard his voice. Calm, casual, trying too hard to sound unaffected. When our eyes met, he froze. He looked smaller somehow, the kind of small that happens when arrogance starts collapsing in on itself. I gave him a polite nod, the kind you give a stranger you used to know, then walked away. That night, another text. "You've changed." I didn't think you could be this cold. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned off my phone. It wasn't coldness. It was boundaries, something he'd never taught me but forced me to learn. Work began to flourish. Clients came back, referrals grew, and I started to feel like a real designer again. A local magazine even featured one of my projects. The caption under my photo read, "Finding beauty in simplicity." They had no idea how true that was, a mutual acquaintance. Told me later that Nathan had been telling people I was just pretending to be successful. I didn't even bother to defend myself. It's amazing how irrelevant gossip becomes when you finally stop needing to be understood. A few weeks later, I found something unexpected in my mailbox. A letter. Real paper, real ink, his handwriting. "Claire, I just wanted to say I miss you. I realize now I made mistakes. You made me feel grounded and I didn't appreciate it. I hope you can forgive me." I read it once, folded it carefully, and put it in my drawer next to that old notebook. I didn't write back. Because the silence was the reply. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the quiet he once used to control me, and using it to build something he could never reach. That night, as I stood by the window watching snow fall over the lake, I realized I didn't feel the cold anymore. Vermont hadn't gotten warmer. I had. A year after I left Nathan, Vermont was still cold, the kind of cold that clings to your breath, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I'd learned to live with it, to like it even. I bought a small house near Shelburne, tucked between pine trees and quiet roads. In the mornings, the light came through the windows soft and gold, and the air smelled like coffee and wood smoke. Every day I woke up to peace, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. One morning, while organizing my workspace, my phone rang. It was Lena. "Have you heard about Nathan?" she asked. "No, why?" She sighed. "He lost his job. Something about the company downsizing. And I think he's seeing Victoria now." Victoria, his old coworker. The one who used to call him a real gentleman. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. I didn't say much after that. Just smiled to myself. I wasn't happy about his downfall. I just didn't care. That was the real freedom. Indifference. A few months later, I met James Carter, one of my clients. He owned a cabin I helped redesign near the lake. He was gentle, kind. He didn't try to fix me or teach me lessons. When I told him a little about my past, he said quietly, "People can't teach you self-worth. They can only make you forget it." I didn't fall for him right away. I just exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt safe. A few months into dating, my business took off. Clients trusted me. I started teaching small design workshops. And then one night, an email arrived. "I heard you're engaged. Congratulations. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't realize how much I hurt you, Nathan." Of course. I stared at the message for a while. The words were soft, but they weren't remorse. They were nostalgia for the control he used to have. I printed the email, folded it, and placed it beside that old letter in my drawer. Two small ghosts side by side. A week later, James and I got married in a small ceremony by Lake Champlain. It snowed lightly, soft flakes floating in the air like dust from an old memory. No fancy guests, no photographers, no grand speeches. Just the people who mattered, and the quiet, when the officiant asked, Do you take this man as your husband? I looked at James and smiled. I do. It felt different this time, not like surrender, but like arrival. That night, after everyone left, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was freezing but calm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number. I knew who it was before I even looked. I hesitated for a second, then opened the message. You'll never be worthy of anyone but me. I didn't react. Didn't get angry. Didn't cry. I just deleted it. Because sometimes, not replying is the reply. When I went back inside, James was cleaning up glasses and humming softly. He looked up at me. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, I said. It's just snowing early this year. He smiled, and I smiled back. Standing there, in the warmth of the home I built, surrounded by love that didn't demand obedience, I realized something simple but powerful. Revenge doesn't always come wrapped in rage. Sometimes it's the quiet peace of knowing you finally got out, and they never will. Nathan lost everything. His job, his image, the illusion that he was in control. And I gained silence, freedom, and the ability to breathe again. He once told me I wasn't worthy of being his wife. He was right, because I was never meant to belong to him. I was meant to belong to myself.